Five Live boxing commentator Mike Costello with me, Mark Chapman, along with writer and broadcaster Steve Bunce, and we're focusing really on Britain's new and unheralded world champions. We've already spoken about Darren Barker. We'll come on to Scott Quigg shortly. So tell us about Jamie McDonnell next then, Mike.
Well, he's 27, he's from Doncaster. He lost 2 of his first 11 professional fights, and no one at that stage was talking about world title glory for him. And I was reading a piece earlier this year in his local paper, the Thorn District Gazette, which quoted his former manager John Rushton saying, in the early days Jamie didn't have the right attitude, he loved nights out, he was eating the wrong food, he even turned off his mobile phone, we couldn't contact him, and he didn't show up for training. He even failed to turn up once for a meeting to go and get his professional licence. But it changed when his career was taken on by Dennis Hobson, best known for his association in the past with Clinton Woods, the former world light heavyweight champion from Sheffield. And McDonnell won the British, Commonwealth and European titles at bantamweight. He's now unbeaten in 5 years, all topped off by a dream night in Doncaster on May the 11th at the Keep Moat Stadium, where he outpointed a tough Mexican called Julio Heya to win the IBF version of the world bantamweight title. And in so many ways, for McDonnell and for Dennis Hobson, it was a huge gamble that paid off.
Well, Dennis Hobson joins us now, the promoter of world IBF bantamweight champion Jamie McDonnell. Evening, Dennis.
Good evening.
Mike says it was a huge gamble that paid off. We'll maybe get to the exact gamble shortly, but tell us about the challenges that you have had in turning Jamie into a world champion.
Well, you've just mentioned about how John Rushton talked about him not living the life sort of thing, and that's true. He's got a little bit of Ricky Hatton in him, but Ricky were already up there and established when he started going off the rails a little bit more. But Jamie came to me, like you said, he'd lost to Lee Askins, he'd lost to Chris Edwards, who aren't, world class type fighters. Lee's a quality fighter, obviously, but he'd lost domestically, and obviously people didn't think he was going to go anywhere. And I've promoted Clinton, I've promoted Ricky Hatton, Carl Thompson, David Hay, but my 2 major achievements, I suppose, promoting obviously are Clinton and Jim, because I've took them from obscurity to world title champion. So yeah, it's been a massive effort. And using my wheeling and dealing skills, I suppose, being a scrap metal merchant, I suppose I know. It's the big thing. I've wrote a little note down here. It's about timing, and if you've got that, obviously, the best promoter out there has been for a long time. Like him all over is Frank Warren, and even when I had my spats with him when I was promoting Ricky Hatton, I always respected him because he was the top in the business, and it's about timing.
It is about timing. It's about finance as well, though. Well, it is, isn't it, Dennis? You say you use your wheeling and dealing skills. We said, Mike referred to it as a gamble. I mean, there are huge financial risks involved for you.
There was. I mean, the alternative was to go to Mexico. I'd been over to LA a couple of times, had talks with Golden Boy. Jim was in line to fight Leo Santa Cruz, who was a formidable fighter, and what we did, it were about timing again. If we waited, I knew that he was going to relinquish and we could fight for the vacant. So I went over there to see what the state of play was and what the timing would be for him to fight for a vacant to give us the best chance, and that would give me the opportunity to maybe bid for the fight and get it over here. So obviously then we got Julio Ceja, that's how I pronounce him, the undefeated kid who'd won 24 fights, 22 by knockout, and his promoter had already got a television deal in Mexico with Televisa, and so I were up against him without a television channel. Now, I didn't fancy going to Mexico. I've watched Man on Fire a few times, and the kids get kidnapped and stuff like that, so I didn't fancy going there for a start, and I'm a little bit told to get called kidnapped. But anyway, so I didn't fancy doing that, so I'm backwards and forwards. I sat Jamie down, I said, Jamie, the alternative, there's 2 options here. I'm going to pay you more than what other certain promoters have paid you, but I'm going to have to dig deep in my pockets to make this happen. And we want to make history, not by just being the first kid in history to fight for a world title, but being the first kid in history to fight in his hometown, and and obviously the venue was the Keep Moat Stadium. Now, the day, we only had one Saturday, and that was May the 11th, that we got a window of opportunity to do it there. And I wanted to do something, be the first in history at doing something. I've had world champions, like I said, but I wanted to be the first in history to do that. And, we've come a long way, myself and Jamie, been with me 6 or 7 years. But when I got him, I sent him to Beijing, Miami, and places like that to broaden his horizon and see where he should be at if he wants to be a world champion. So I sat him down and I said, look, I'm going to have to dig deep, and it's a gamble. But I believe in you that much. I could have took a nice payday, but I believed in him that much. I thought, we get a world champion here, I can take Jamie on into some big unification fights.
Without being rude, and it is rude, isn't it, to talk money, but how deep did you have to dig?
There were a few £100,000 I had to dig deep for, Mark.
Whoa.
And to get it over here, and if I give you the list, and I didn't have television behind me, so obviously it was tough. I did the whole of the production myself. I had to cover the pitch, get a canopy. Mike Goodall helped me with everything. I got some great people behind me, but it was a massive gamble, and a great investment, but a massive gamble, and it paid off.
Dennis, I said the gamble paid off as well, but in essence the paying off is still to come, I guess. What if the decision had gone against Jamie that night?
Look, I mean, my dad's a compulsive gambler. He probably wouldn't like me to say that, but he is, and I've grown up, being a bit of a gambler myself. And I don't know if you read the story I did in Boxing Monthly not so long ago. I sold a greyhound to buy my first pickup so I could get a round going. So I've always been a gambler, but obviously a calculated one. Now, this is one of the biggest gambles I've ever took, and some people, other promoters, other managers thought I were crazy for taking the punt. But, if you believe in something passionately that much, and I've worked all my life, and I had to wheel and deal, and I had to team and ladle to get the money together to make it happen. But, I believed in it and did it. And it's paid off, but, it's yet to pay off, like you said. But there is some great fights out there for Jamie, and I can make him, like I have done Clinton, made him financially secure for the rest of his life, and that's what I aim to do with Jamie.
Now, you might be able to do that, Dennis, making him financially secure, but there's a history of British boxers taking the money overseas, and the great one was Colin Jones back in the 80s, who could have had the fight here, but decided to go twice out to Nevada and fight Milton McCrory there, once after he feels being stitched up, then goes back and he feels he was stitched up again. But he doesn't regret that. I spoke to him just last week, Colin Jones, a great fighter. He doesn't regret it because he got paid that extra money. And I'm just wondering, when you discussed it with Jamie, was it you or him that said, you know what, we're not going to go to Mexico. I know we're going to get a lot more money over there, but let's be honest, let's be brutally honest here, Dennis. He wasn't going to win in Mexico, was he?
Well, one of the first comments he made straight after the fight was the difference between me being a world champion now was obviously not going to Mexico. So I suppose you could say, in a way, I bought the title, but I paid. Jamie got decent money for that. Yeah. He got decent money. He didn't fight for
peanuts.
For peanuts.
Okay.
And so I've always looked after the kids who I've promoted and managed, and I did so with Jamie, and long may it continue.
How has the climate changed since you were working with Ricky Hatton 6-7 years ago?
When you got Ricky Hatton, it was like pushing against open doors. I'd go up into Caesar's Palace when we were putting one of the first fights together in Vegas, and I'm sat there. He's a promoter's dream. He were promoting me. He were telling everybody how good I was, and as a person and as a promoter. So you just sit back, you press the switch, and he's off. Whereas like you got Clinton, and sometimes you have to nudge to get a sound out of him, and people say, why ain't he? Why isn't he, so well known? But Ricky were out there selling himself, and my daughter's a singer, and I say to her the same thing. You can have the greatest voice, you can have the most talent, but you've got to have personality. You've got to go and sell yourself and make people turn on to you. Was the TV market different back then as well? Yeah, there were more options out there. It's a bit monopolised, I suppose, at the moment, and that needs to change. But I think it will do. I think. the competition in any walk of business is healthy, and that's what we need.
Dennis, is Jamie any better at recognising boxers? Because Chappers, Dennis took him out to Las Vegas, and he saw Sugar Ray Leonard there, and Dennis was getting all excited, and Jamie said, "Is he outgood him? Is he any good him?"
He didn't even know.
He
didn't know who he was. They were all the champions there: Leonard, Hagler, Duran. They were all there, and we're getting out of the lift, and I said to him, "Oh, have you photographed up with Sugar Ray?" He went, "Which one is he?" I went, "Sugar Ray." He went, "Were he any good like?" I went, "You're joking." And he said, "I don't watch boxing," but in a way, it's a good thing, because he can have a little bit of banter with us just before the fight, and he doesn't take anything out of himself. So, in a way, it's a good thing, but not to know Sugar Ray Leonard.
But in that sense, Dennis,
it's not as bad as Bunty's northern accent then when he tried to do the impression, to be honest with you, Dennis.
I must admit, I got a bit confused there, chaps. Hold my hands up. I always tell the truth, hold my hands up. Got it wrong.
Yeah. Dennis, in that sense, if he doesn't really know much about the sport, does he kind of understand what he's done? Does he recognise his status?
To be honest, I don't know what goes on in his head sometimes, but he's very likeable, and he's got a talent. What did Peter Crouch say? That I don't know if it's true or it's a joke, but did he say, "What would you be if you wasn't a footballer?" He said a virgin, didn't he? So, he's got a talent in the ring, and he's got a gift, and maybe he realises it, maybe he doesn't, but if he's got somebody to drive the vehicle, and luckily we found each other. Luckily Clinton found me, and I found him, and the rest is history. But there's a long way to go with Jamie, and because he's like 5'9.5", and he gets down to 8 stone 6, he can go through a few weights. If he still lives the life and he wants it that much, he can make himself an absolute superstar.
Dennis, listen, thank you very much for joining us this evening on Five Live Boxing. Just that story, when you sold the Greyhound to get a pickup truck, was that either a very good Greyhound that you got money for, or a very cheap pickup truck?
It were both, but I was desperate. I took a little bit less than I would have, but I sold the ground, and I made it in the scrap metal business. But the pickup was that was falling apart.
What was quickest, Dennis?
Me to grab the money out of his hand, the 250 quid.
Great to have you on, Dennis. Thank you.
You're welcome. Good to talk to you.
Dennis Hobson, who promotes world IBF bantamweight champion Jamie McDonnell. We touched on the TV market there with Dennis, Mike. Is that a problem for the sport at the moment?
Well, I think Dennis spoke there about a monopoly. It has been dominated for a long time in the mainstream by Sky TV, and they've just signed a new deal, or extended their deal last week with Eddie Hearn through until 2016 for 20 shows a year. But, there are two sides to these stories. As much as we talk about a monopoly there, and there is still Box Nation where Steve works and where Frank Warren's fighters appear, this is 20 shows that wouldn't otherwise be there anywhere on television. Terrestrial TV, apart from Channel 5 3 or 4 times a year, has pretty much given up on boxing. So, 20 shows a year on Sky TV is still a huge showcase for the likes of Darren Barker. And as I've said before, Ricky Hatton didn't throw a single punch on terrestrial TV, and look what he did with himself, partly because, as Dennis was saying there, he was ready to answer to every microphone and look into every camera that came his way. It depends on personality, and to a degree depends on the weight division as well. It's much tougher the lighter you are.
Yeah, but personality does play a huge part in sport.
It certainly does. And with Ricky Hatton, we did some studies, non-scientific studies, as you can imagine, chappers, because my hate of statistics. But Mike and I, when we've been in Vegas for Hatton fights, we'd see these thousands of people, 8,000 people queuing up to go to his weigh-in. And I'd say to Mike, okay, grab your microphone, we're going to go outside, we're going to interview 10 random people, male, female, black, white, whatever mix. And I said every single one of them will have a personal Ricky Hatton story, how they met him. And do you remember we did that, Mike?
Yeah.
And we chose a whole mix, 40 different years in ages, 7 inches in height, about 12 stone in weight, and every one of them had an individual how they met Ricky Hatton's story. I've never met a person yet in the boxing business, fan or guy or anyone who makes a living from it, who hasn't personally met with Ricky Hatton. And that's genius. But you know what it is also, Mark, those 4 or 5 years when Ricky was learning his trade, he spent hours in arenas, hours shaking hands and posing for pictures.
And also, Mark, what's really important here, as well as the personality, it's the makeup of the fights that they're involved in. None of these fighters who've crossed over, whoever they are, going all the way back through history, have got a weak record. Ricky Hatton's popularity skyrocketed from the moment he took on Kostya for the world title in June of 2005. Yes, he was already selling out the MEN Arena before that, but his popularity rose to an unforeseen level after he boxed Kostya, and then within a couple of years he was taking on Floyd Mayweather in Las Vegas, and there was a recognition that he was ready to take on the best when they too were at their best. It's no coincidence that Carl Froch within boxing circles was getting recognition, but it spread beyond boxing elsewhere in sport. I know Steve was saying that Carl Froch hasn't crossed over beyond sport, but certainly within sport the recognition of him started to come once those great fights came one after the other. Joe Calzaghe likewise, when he beat Jeff Lacey, and soon after that Mikhail Kessler, and then Bernard Hopkins, that's when his popularity increased as well.